There's only one thing worse than getting left by a woman because you're broke. And that's when she runs off with a guy that's more flat-ass broke than you are. There was about a million things happening all at once in this very short period of time. Really only about a year, I think. It was pandemonium around us, like in every sense of the word. Losing Emmett, things heating up in Nashville, all sorts of things, like just crazy stuff. And we went over to a little town in Louisiana called Alexandria. And Alexandria is a famous spot because it's the birthplace of Jerry Lee Lewis. And there was a whole slew of people laugh when I say this, but it's true. Jimmy Swaggart and Oral Roberts and Mickey Gilley and Jerry Lee were all cousins. And they talk a lot in all the biographies of Jerry Lee about he was torn about playing rock and roll music because his cousins Jimmy and Oral and these guys, they were all like, telling him he was going to hell and all these different things. So it's a colorful little town, and there's certainly some interesting people that came from there, I can tell you that. But there's one in particular in this story that figures quite prominently in my life for quite a few years. So Stephanie was still hanging out with old Cross-Eyed Joe, whatever his name was, over there in Jackson, or we didn't really know. I guess she was. You didn't really know much about what was going on with her most of the time. And so we pull up at this little church, and it was a big deal that we were there because I don't know. There was just a lot of. It was a good time for us artistically because Jerry was getting a lot of attention from a lot of different people, and we were we were getting asked to come play these churches that were, modernized Christianity, like pretty well Jerry's doctrine. It was almost a secular Christianity, and these churches were, open and, modernized. The people everyone was welcome. Just modern, just had a modern edge to them, like. So we would show up at these places, and it became quite a spectacle because Jerry was sort of the linchpin almost of this movement. And so we show up at this church, and it was like we were welcomed by the pastor who was a young man, and it was a beautiful big church. And then we met this young kid. Now, mind you, I was, 23 or 24 years old at the time, so I wasn't much older, but I think I was a few years, 3 years older than him. And I believe he had a flat top haircut at the time, I think. And he had an interesting story, which was for some reason was told to us. Like it was important that we knew all this, because this kid was like the local. He was the local star. He wrote his own gospel songs and sang and played guitar and whatnot, and he was one of these singers that had that 1,000-yard stare off in the distance while he was singing, like Garth Brooks, which to me always seemed incredibly overdramatic and a little bit fake. And so I was like, okay, so who is this kid, right? And so he had a very interesting story. He had an older brother who apparently was mega talented. He was actually the star of the family. He wrote and sang and played guitar and had a church band, like a country band, and he was a star. And sadly, he died very young, and I can't remember what it was from. I don't remember if it was a brain tumor or an aneurysm or leukemia, but it was a tragic loss. And so his little brother, this kid we met, when the older brother died, and the younger brother stepped in and decided that he was going to carry on his brother's legacy. And this young kid we were meeting, his name was Andy Griggs. And so some of you may obviously know Andy Griggs. He had a little explosion of success in Nashville in the 90s, and turned out to be a real talented dude, right? But when I met him, he was a young player starting out, and he wasn't much of a guitar player, and he frankly wasn't really that good a singer. He was okay. He had a pleasant voice, but his pitch wasn't that good, but he had a tremendous amount of conviction, which to me, if somebody does something honestly from their heart with a great deal of emotion and stuff like that, it almost makes up for any imperfection in their performance and stuff. And so, like, I was struck by him. I thought he was pretty damn cool. I thought this kid's, he's dead serious about all this. And, well, and he's a good-looking dude on top of that. And so immediately I noticed that Stephanie was all over this guy. And I was concerned, even though we were long split. I was just like, well, this is turning uncomfortable. And so that's how we met him. And pretty soon it was obvious that him and her were bound to be an item, and they soon were. And Griggs started coming over to Alabama and hanging out with us, and he played some shows with us and all this other stuff, and that was all developing him and her. That was going to happen one way or the other. So this is how strange things are, how you see the building blocks of things occurring. And at the time, I couldn't see them. And when I look back on it now, it's like obvious that that's what was afoot. There was a couple of huge things that were about to happen, all stacked up against each other. Pretty soon, it was time to go to Waylon's house. So we loaded up in the bus, and we drove up to Nolensville, just on the west side of Nashville, I think it is. And we were pulling up into the driveway of this kind of older, modest-looking, modern-style house. It was green and like an olive green. It was like a little tiny kind of a compound in there. There was a guardhouse. There was a gatehouse with a guard and an old security guard. Turns out that he'd been working in that guardhouse for about 35 years. Wayland had hired him and never and kept him going his whole entire life. This old security guard in there, you know. And first thing I noticed was Wayland's house was literally just across the interstate from the apartment I was staying in with Gary Ray when I was working for the McCarter sisters. And that struck me. I was like, holy crap, I was right next door to this man all that time and didn't even know. And that kind of freaked me out. So it was very, very, very surreal. We were walking into something that just... There's really no way to describe it. You're walking into a world where the biggest musical creators that you've ever known are all sitting in the living room and the kitchen and the dining room and walking around holding their Cokes and their birthday cake, and you don't even know what the hell to do, and they're treating you like you belong there. So it was really weird. And so we walk up to the door, we ring the bell, and who answers the door but Wayland himself answers the door. And he's got both hands in casts. He had just had carpal tunnel surgery. So he had both hands in casts. And ironically, I would go through the same thing, you know, about 5 years later. And so he opens the door, and he's a big smile on his face, and he's a big man. He's taller than me, and he says, "Hey, how you doing, Jerry? You know, come on in the house, you know." And we're all there, me and Jerry and Tammy and Stephanie and Bob. Bob's there. He drove the bus up for us. And we all walk in this house, and he's just like, y'all make yourself at home, man. Have a drink and have a Coke or whatever. We got water and we got this, and there's no alcohol around. And there was food everywhere, and the place was packed. And Marty was there. Actually, Marty showed up a little while after, actually. And so, yeah. So I'll tell you how surreal all this is. For years, people used to tell me, because I had long blonde hair and I dressed pretty snazzy most of the time, and people would tell me I looked like John Anderson, the guy that did Swangin', that guy. And I walk in this huge living room, which is like a 2-level living room. I walk in, to my left, there's a top part, and there's a grand piano sitting there. That's where we're supposed to play. And then to my right, the living room sinks down a couple steps, and there's all kinds of sofas and a fireplace and all that stuff down there. And I'm looking around this room, and all I see are superstars, right? I'm looking around, and there's John Anderson right up against the wall, leaning up against the wall. On the couch is Farron Young, Travis Tritt, Connie Smith. And I walk in the kitchen, and Jesse Coulter's in there, and it's just out of control. Like I was like, what the hell am I doing here? And I saw John standing against the wall, so I just decided to go all in. And Wayland's introducing us to everybody, and I walk up to John Anderson, and he's a lot shorter than me, and I walk over and I said, "Hey, Mr. John, my name's John too, John Paul. I play with Jerry." And oh man, we've been waiting for you all to get here. Waylon had told everybody that we were coming there to play, and I said, "People tell me I look like you," and he goes, "You do kind of look like me. That's pretty weird." And we did. It was kind of strange. We both had the beard and the long hair and the curls, and this guy was super nice. He was like everybody I met at that party was incredibly kind, like just over kind almost, you know, it's strange. Fame does strange things to people's lives. I've been lucky enough to be in very close quarters with some of the most famous people in the music business, in the history of the music business. And I'm not even sure exactly how to say this, but I was nobody, and a fan of all these people. But at the same time, I was instantly accepted into their ranks because of the band I was playing in. And at the time, I didn't know it, but I was turning a lot of heads as an instrumentalist, and I didn't catch on to that. I really didn't think. I've never thought in my whole life that I impressed anybody, and I've always been shocked to find out that I do. Really, it's actually a problem I've had all my life. Self-esteem is not one of my strong suits. And so I've been around these people in this strange duality where I'm one of them, but at the same time, I'm just sitting there with my mouth hanging open that they're even talking to me. And it made me realize something, especially that day in that particular get together. I saw something, and I've seen it all my life since then. When the normal person runs into somebody of that level of fame, they don't treat them like a human being. They just see the fame, and they fawn and cry and do all sorts of crazy shit, and they just see the fame. So they relate to these people in a very, I think, unhealthy way. And when I say that, I mean it's not healthy for them because they're not taking the time to look through that to the actual person and appreciate the actual person. They're just seeing their love of their music and of their persona and their branding and all these things. And on the artist side of things, it's a very hollow encounter because they're human beings, and all the people that they meet in a normal setting, or in a normal business when they're out doing their art, they're not making any real connection with anybody. They're just a vehicle for what they do musically, which means they, after a while, they feel isolated and misunderstood and all of these things. So while I've met, a few people in the business over the years that weren't so nice to me, when I saw that room full of stars, all acting completely normal, it made me realize that when somebody is short with a fan or seems standoffish or whatever, there's a good reason for that. They're protecting themselves from things, and protecting their their real selves, it must be incredibly difficult to be at that level of fame where, people love you, but they don't know why. When you start to realize, if you weren't a musician, and if you hadn't had, you know, 15 number one hits and sold 55 million records, that nobody would even know who the hell you are, or care for that matter. You'd just be Joe Blow. And the person behind all that genius really isn't recognized or sought after. It's the music that someone comes after, right? It's weird. It's a very strange thing, and I've thought about it all my life, and in later years dealt with it myself. Dealt with people that were just fanatical about what I did, and in my head I'm going, you don't even know who I am. Why is it so important, for to interact with me? My music is what I'm giving to you, and don't make any judgments about who I am and what I've done and seen and lived until you know me, and you'll never get to know me because I'm not going to be here long enough in this spot for you to take the time to do that. So, and it's just really weird. It's just it's one of the strangest ways of making a living that you can find, where you're selling off pieces of your intellectual property and your emotional property, and you have to back it up with some kind of personality, some persona, some branding, you know what I mean? Like, it's really bizarre. And people have gotten away for years with being fantastic musicians, but being arseholes. And that makes me confused too. Like, somebody who's just not nice to people they meet, and they still retain this massive level of fame. Why? Why is that? So, I don't know. I was looking around that room and just going, holy shit. How did I end up here? And, soon it was time to play. And so Waylon says, you guys want to go and get your instruments? And I sure enough, so me and Bob went out and grabbed the bass and Jerry's guitar and my guitar and my mandolin and my banjo, all three instruments. Jerry said, bring everything in. I said, yes, sir. And so I took these instruments, my instruments, and I put them down and opened the cases so they wouldn't be up where we were playing. Didn't want to clutter the performance area. And I opened all my cases down in the lower level of the living room by the couch there, and just set them all up. And as I came back up to the piano, we were discussing, when to play, and Waylon was like, man, don't knock yourselves out, just play a half an hour, take a little break, and play again, and just have fun, And so we're like, yes, sir, we'll do it. And at that point, Marty showed up, and he had somebody with him too, and I can't remember who it was, but he showed up. He was all smiling and glad, handing everybody, and we owed Marty everything at that point. He was, putting us on the map, really, and then something happened that I wasn't expecting, and I should have expected, except at that time, in those years, I was unaware of the history of Waylon's actual history, and all the people he'd worked with, and like I obviously knew everything about his music, but I was unaware of the background of his career. And who walks in the door but Chet Atkins? And I looked out the hallway and saw him walk in, and I nearly shit in my clothes. I mean, of all the people that was in that room, that man was, I mean, obviously from everything I've said in this entire series and everything that I've put on this whole channel, Chet Atkins was the number one reason why I was standing there. It was him that inspired everything I was doing. He was the reason I wanted to play the guitar, the reason I learned to play the guitar, the way I learned to play it. It was him. And he walked in just as meek as whatever, and he was such a, I don't even know how to describe this, but when that man walked in a room, everything got calm. I don't know how else to describe it. He walked in the room, and there just became this beautiful, mellow feeling in the room. And he walked in and smiled gently at everybody and nodded his head. He was very quiet, and he walked right by me and went down and sat on this couch, right where my instruments were. He was within grabbing distance of all of it. So I think I already had my mandolin in my hands when he walked by me and sat down, and we started the show. And we were just all gathered around this grand piano. Stephanie was on the piano. Tammy was just over there with the bass. Jerry was across the piano from me, and I was on the, on the right-hand side of it. And we started playing. And man, we tore it up. We tore the walls out of that place. I was really proud of us. Like it was one of those moments musically when all of the crap and bullshit and horrible times and horrible feelings and all the things that we went through, as a family band is really what it was. And everything that I had gone through previous to that with Enoch and with, losing mother and all of that sacrifice that I'd made over the previous 8 years or 9 years, it all came to fruition in that first song we played. And we could do no wrong. We were on fire, and everybody was silent, and Waylon was sitting in this chair against the wall there by the patio doors, watching us and smiling and just shaking his head, and people were gathering around us in a circle, and we just tore the place apart. And then Jerry says, grab the banjo. So I left the piano and I went down, and Chet was still on the couch looking at all these instruments opened up. And I went down and I laid my mandolin in the case, and he looked at me and said, which one do you want now, son? And I nearly cracked. Like there's just no way to describe how, and I'm talking about people being fanatics. Well, I was one, and I still am, and I always was around him. I nearly fell out when he even talked to me, and I said, well, the banjo, sir. And oh, you play the banjo? I said, yes, sir. And so he handed me my banjo, and I went back up, and we played a couple of numbers. I frailed, and I got to frail a number, and then three finger. And Chet kept leaning. I could see Chet out of the corner of my eye, and he kept turning further and further towards us in the couch, until he was sort of like had his arm up on the back of the couch, and he was sitting sideways watching us. And then a couple more numbers in, Jerry goes, let's do whatever it was. It was a quartet number, and he says, go get the guitar. So down I went in the living room again, and Chet goes, you want this one now? And he's pointing at the guitar, and I said, yes, sir. You play the guitar too? And I said, yes, sir. And so he hands me the guitar, and this time he gets up and he follows me up to the piano. The guitar got his attention. And of course, this tune that we're doing is a Chet style guitar part. Quite complicated too. I had done a really interesting arrangement of the intros and breaks on this tune. So I'm standing there with the guitar, and Chet Atkins comes and literally puts his elbows on the piano, and he's leaning on the piano, and he's just staring at me. And I almost fucking blacked out. I was like, holy God, I don't know if I can handle this. And Jerry looking at me like he could, I must have looked, I'm pretty sure I was probably as white as a ghost at this point. And so Jerry says, do it. And he's looking at Chet and looking at me. He says, do it, son, do it. And I tore into this thing and just nailed it. And it was, and I even put some ad lib stuff in that was just brilliant. Like the sheer amount of adrenaline and fear I had completely shut off the part of my brain that was capable of making mistakes. The right brain kicked in 100% and I played my ass off. And when the song was done, Chet looks at Jerry and goes, "That boy's a triple threat, isn't he?" And Jerry, of course, proud as a peacock, "Why, yes, sir, he sure is. He's one hell of a player." He didn't say that, but he said, because he wouldn't say that word in front of people, right? But he was like, "Yeah, this boy can sure enough play anything. You don't even know." He said that he plays the fiddle, he sings good. And Jerry just went off on Chet about me, and Chet just stayed there at the end of the piano, just kind of holding his chin, and he's watching me and looking at, and he stayed there for the whole rest of the set. He just laid on the piano and watched us do all this stuff. And when it was over, the set was over. We played about 45 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. And that was it. I thought we'd play again, but we took this break, and just everybody wanted to talk to us. So we're mingling with all these people. And somewheres along in there, I lost track of Bob. I was like, where the hell did Bob go? So, of course, I go in the kitchen. Bob's in the kitchen where the food is. And he's chatting up Jessie, Waylon's wife, right? Jessie Calder. Everybody loved Bob, right? And Jessie just thought Bob was great. She was in there, and he was making her laugh, and they were having a grand old time. And I had seen little Shooter. Shooter was maybe, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old. And he was upstairs. There was an upstairs, like a catwalk in the upper part of the house that overlooked the living room and all this stuff. And I'd look up from time to time, and Shooter would be literally looking through the railings, looking through the posts in the railings. He'd be holding on to them, watching everybody. And there was a housekeeper up there with him, I think, or a nanny or something. So I go in the kitchen, and I'm talking to Jessie and Bob, and we're eating all this stuff and drinking Cokes, and Jessie left the room for a second, and me and Bob were in there talking, like we were both just floored at what was going on, And all of a sudden, Jessie ran in the kitchen, and she said, "John Paul, did you want to get an autograph from Chet?" I said, "Absolutely." I said, "What's?" She said, "He's leaving. He's leaving. You got to get out there." This is what I mean. People knew, right? Nothing was said to anybody in particular about my relationship with Chet's music and stuff. But everybody knew, and Chet knew, right? Like Chet, they all. There was a lot of things going on behind the scenes of these people that I was just unaware of. These people thought a lot more of me than I understood. And I was so focused on being in Jerry's band that I wasn't thinking outside the box. I wasn't looking at Jerry as a stepping stone to get to Nashville, even though it was happening all the time. It just never occurred to me. So I was happy doing what we were doing. So Jessie says, "You got to get out there." And she had my guitar in her hand. She said, "Take your guitar out and get him to sign your guitar." And I was like, holy shit. So I run out of the kitchen, run through the living room, past the piano, up the hallway, and there he is at the door. And he's saying goodbye to somebody. And I still get emotional thinking about this. I really wanted to say something important to Chet, and say something cool. And he saw me standing there with my guitar and a Sharpie. Jessie gave me a Sharpie, a black Sharpie. And he saw me standing there, and I was looking him, looking him in the face, and there was a million things that I wanted to say to him. I wanted to tell him, thank you for everything. But all that came out was I looked at him and I said, "Boy, you don't know." And that's all I got out of my mouth, and the tears just exploded out of my face. It was really embarrassing. And I found out something about Chet that day. When he saw I was overcome, he just he reached out and grabbed the guitar with one hand, and he put his other hand on my shoulder. And he said, "I do know, son." So he signed the back of my guitar on the headstock. And I thanked him. And he touched my shoulder again. He said, "I know, son." He said, "Don't worry." And he walked away. It wasn't the last time I was going to see him. It wasn't the last I was going to hear of him either. And but he was the most gentle human being I ever met in the business. Not only gentle, but smart and dry. He did more for guitar music and for music in general than most of the world even realizes. He wasn't just the greatest guitar player, in my opinion, that ever lived. He was a producer, and he championed dozens of artists and produced dozens of records and completely changed the music industry. There's just no way to measure what he did. The whole reason that we were even there in that house with those people was because of Chet Atkins, because Chet championed Waylon when he was starting out and got him on RCA records and produced records for him. And you know, there was everybody in that house could have told a story about Chet that was profound, that had some massively profound effect on their career, their music, their outlook. And I hope that nobody ever forgets Chet, not just as a guitar player, but as a human being. And I know I won't. I'm going to leave the story for now there. There was a lot more that happened at the party, but I'm going to go into it in the next episode. But I'll tell you what, as much as the guitar, led me through my life, I ended up with a mandolin in my hands more times than not. And that little instrument took me a lot of places as well. And it got me the job with Jerry. It put me, standing side by side with Bill Monroe many times. I met a lot of great people because I was also a mandolin player. I could almost do an entire series on what each instrument did for me and where it put me. But the mandolin is something I'll never desert or abandon. It's an instrument that I still play all the time. And, yeah, unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say that, but I was a bit embarrassed that the first thing that Chet Atkins saw me play was a mandolin. But it didn't matter. Because, he stayed on in there with me until I came around to the guitar. But, yeah, it's a moment in my life I'll never forget, and I wouldn't take $1 million for it. Not $1 million.